As a child, I spent a lot of time outside. I spent a lot of time underwater, around the water, and as a child and now, I have a very strong interest in fish. And I always remember, whether it was snorkeling or being in an aquarium, just catching the stare, the gaze of a fish that's looking at you through the glass, or as it's coming up below you and you just meet its eyes. And I just felt like that there was some sort of connection between us, like I should know this particular individual fish, as if we share something that, I just had no recollection of sharing with a fish. It's not every day that you feel like fish are kin. And it was a couple years ago that I was in a Barnes& and Noble, and the title of this book caught my eye, Your Inner Fish. And I was like, well, that's a strange title. That's Your Inner Fish. What does that mean? And I remember getting the book next Christmas, and I just sat down with it, and I was completely blown away by it. The revelations that this book provides are so fascinating, interesting, and so I'd like today to let all of our listeners out there uh, to become acquainted with your inner fish. The central figure of this book, this inner fish of sorts, is an organism that the author Neil Shubin and his colleagues discovered on the cold, windswept island of Ellesmere Island, located in Nunavut, Canada. The fossil itself is 375 million years old, which means it dates from a period of time known as the Devonian. In grade school and high school, we were always taught that the Devonian is the age of fishes. And in a way, it really was, because we see the rapid diversification and radiation of the major fish groups that would be present in today's oceans. Yes, we had cartilaginous fish evolve earlier, as early as the Ordovician, but really we see the radiation of bony fish. We see things like placoderms, organisms like Dunkleosteus, these terribly huge predatory marine organisms with bone teeth, and we see tons of bony fish with all sorts of spines on their bodies and fins. And we see the emergence of a group of fish known as lobe-finned fish. And it's from these lobe-finned fish we get the organism known as Tiktaalik rosea. It has been hailed as the missing link, and for a very important reason. It represents the transition between fish that live in the water and all terrestrial vertebrates. Organisms like this are the common ancestor of all terrestrial vertebrates, including you and me. In the limbs of Tiktaalik rosea, which evolved from fins, we can see the precursors of our own hands and our own arms. In the vertebra, just behind the head and just before the pelvic girdle of Tiktaalik rosea, we see the development of a neck that would eventually become your neck and mine. We see so many characteristics in transitional forms, such as the important Tiktaalik rosea, that would eventually evolve and develop into many features that make us entirely and fully human. Not only does Neil Shubin introduce us to our inner fish in the sense of geological time and show us that our bodies come from fish ancestors, he also pulls the latest in genetic research, which shows us that many of the things that make us who we are originated in the fishes, in the first vertebrates. Now, there are these things called Hox genes. And what Hox genes do is that they govern and regulate how the body looks, where the head should go, where the chest should go, where the legs should go. Now, although all organisms have these, they were diversified and expanded in the fishes. And these very same Hox genes, which governed the body plan of Tiktaalik, of Dunkleosteus, of Eunosthenopteron, of zebrafish, of tuna, of salmon, of sharks, are the very same genes that govern how we look, how our body is planned out. What's also fascinating to realize is that not only do we have filamentous gills as embryos, like fish embryos do today, we also have pharyngeal arches. Now, in fish, those pharyngeal arches from embryos develop into the gill arches and jaws, which mirrors the evolutionary history of how the first jaw developed from the first gill arches. Now, in human embryos, we don't have external gills as adults, of course, so in human embryos, what happens is that these pharyngeal arches develop into our lower jaw, but they also develop into parts of our skull, our ear bones, our hyoid bone, and our pharynx. They, in essence, develop into some very key essential parts that make us human. Without fish, without gills, without pharyngeal arches, we wouldn't be able to speak, we wouldn't be able to eat, we wouldn't be able to live, we wouldn't be able to exist. And so taking all this information together, we can see that the things that make us who we are evolved in organisms that were just starting to come out of the water several millions of years ago, and even further back than that. What makes us human evolved with the first fishes, the positioning of our eyes and our heads and our torsos, the development of fins into limbs. From gill arches, we get jaws and ear bones, and larynxes and pharynxes that allow us to speak and to sing, and a whole host of other adaptations that over time would eventually make us who we are, would allow us to do the things that we would consider to make us human. And I find that to be a very humbling and also very fantastic notion that you can look at the fish that swim around you in a coral reef or in a lake or in an aquarium, and you can identify that you have a shared history, that you and the fish and all other terrestrial vertebrates have been on this fantastic evolutionary journey from the first moments that our first ancestors walked out of the water to today. And really knowing that we are connected at that deep of level makes life so much more beautiful and so much more interesting. Looking at your hands, you realize that, these were once fins. You feel your jaw and you realize this was once, a gill arch that supported a respiratory system instead of, something that helps us to eat. And so it's just taking all this into consideration that really start to realize that we are not so different from the other vertebrates that live with us, and we aren't so different from the fish that swim in the bodies of water around us. However, I would like to point out that this really isn't the end of the story. This is just the beginning. Yes, we've discovered transitional forms as important as Tiktaalik, but we have to realize that the fossils that we have only make up a small percentage of the record of life that was lost in those mass extinctions all those years ago. And that perhaps somewhere in some ice-covered island or deep beneath some vast ocean, there could be a fossil or several fossils that enlighten us to more transitional forms that represent major milestones in terrestrial vertebrate evolution. With the increased advancements in genetic science, we might also discover other ways that we are related to fish. For example, in the air bladders of fish, we have found chemical markers and genetic leftovers that are also found in our lungs. That is an entire story that remains to be resolved and uncovered. And so we still, well, I'll say this. We have gotten to know our inner fish a lot, but I'd say we still are only at the introductions. There's still an entire evolutionary story to unravel by reading our DNA and reading the fossil record that may lead us down paths that we would never expect, that we would never dream of in our wildest imaginations. And so I think one last final word to realize is that we walk this journey of discovery and of progression. We don't walk it alone. We carry with us the vestiges, the holdovers, and the legacy of our fish ancestors who took those first steps out onto land and conquered a new world. With us, we hold a evolutionary story that is so vast and so complex that we will never finish telling it in our lifetime, in several lifetimes, or eons from now. I'm sure there are still plenty of discoveries to be made about our fish ancestors and about the inner fish that makes us human. A final word of thank you to our sponsors, Mozilla Firefox, IBM, and our special sponsor today, Hiram College, my home institution where I'm currently studying freshwater ecology and currently getting to know my inner fish as well. Thank you all for listening and have a good day.